Welcome to the Bible Lab. Our goal every week is to take our questions about God and about life into the lab of God's truth, giving you tools to use as you study the Word of God for yourself. God's Word tells us the amazing story of a fallen creation, the Savior who redeemed it, and the history of how it all unfolded. Welcome to Season 2 as we journey from cover to cover on the Bible Lab. Thanks for joining us. Filthy man.
Welcome back to the Bible Lab, your favorite casual, amateur Bible teaching podcast on the internet.
That's fair. It's mine.
I think we got the market cornered on casual, amateur Bible podcasts. Anyway, my name is Jake Spielbauer, one of the pastors here at LifeBridge Christian Church in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and I'm one of your weekly hosts of the Bible Lab, and I'm joined in studio by my good friend,
Pastor Ryan, one of the bi-weekly hosts?
Kind of depends on the week.
That's true.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we're glad to be with you. We're continuing to read through the Bible in a year, from cover to cover, Genesis to Revelation, by reading 3 chapters a day and 5 on Sunday. And our studying has recently had us going through the wisdom literature of the Bible. The Bible contains many genres and different types of literature, and we see a wide variety within the wisdom literature, which would cover Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, Song of Solomon, and they give us a great kind of different voice than a lot of other parts of the Bible. They speak in really unique ways. There's lots of nuance and poetry and literary value to be found here. Last week we covered the first half of the Proverbs, and this week we're picking up our study in Proverbs chapter 17. So we're going to do an overview of some of our favorite highlights from the Proverbs, and then we're going to move into a new book, which I'm really excited about discussing today because it is very, very interesting. And I heard someone say once that Ecclesiastes is this book that just doesn't seem to fit with all of our hopeful ideas about what the Bible should be, because we go from Psalms, which is, these beautiful songs back to God. We get to Proverbs, where we have these seemingly clear black and white ideas about here's how the world works. And then Ecclesiastes is just a chaotic mess, exploring the disappointments and frustrations of life here on earth. And so we're going to talk a little bit about Ecclesiastes today. Both of them, of course, heavily authored and contributed to by Solomon. So today, Ryan, we're picking up in the Proverbs. And it's difficult in Proverbs to pick up on some of our, typical conversation patterns are around key themes. And so we'll approach large sections of the Bible this year and identify key themes within the chunk that we're reading each week to help people identify what they should be looking for. But Proverbs doesn't quite work the same way because it's made up of these small, bite-sized pieces of wisdom. But as we look at this last half of Proverbs, what should we be noticing, or what did you notice? What are some of the things that seemed to emerge in your reading of the Proverbs?
Certainly there's again, I remember being in Bible school and thinking, when I do Proverbs, I'll finally have a clearer understanding of how it works. And there's not. But just to talk on money and rich people and poor people and how they view money. I noted a couple of them on here that even they don't necessarily contrast each other, but they're just interesting ways to look at it. Certainly kind of the idea of entanglement of wine and strong drink, how to engage with others wisely, and how to do relationships. Noted on here also just the idea of parenting. How does Proverbs instruct us to parent well?
Yeah, something we explored last week that I think was really worth repeating and exploring some more is the idea that if we need a game plan for how to make decisions in different areas of life, Proverbs is a great place to go. It's meant to be used that way. Yeah. It gives us these really memorable ways of thinking about everyday situations that we can take and immediately apply. And there's lots of parts of the Bible where we have to do a lot more work to get to, interpretation and application. Yep. But in Proverbs, you draw straight lines. You can connect the dots right from what Solomon is saying, essentially, in a lot of ways, to things that we face. I love that you drew your attention to money, because I do think there are a few buckets that Solomon tends to go back to as really important areas of life that are going to have a big impact on whether we live wisely and experience all the blessings of that, or whether we live foolishly and experience all of the consequences of that. One that continues to stick out to me is something really simple that could be a big principle if we actually listen to it, that I come back to again and again because I believe it's repeated a couple times, is Proverbs 22:7, which says, "The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender." We talked about that a little bit last week with Joel. We're warned in a few places to beware of the deceptiveness and kind of the entanglement of trying to wear yourself out to get more money. The pursuit of wealth is something that Solomon talks about. Now, that's easy for him to say, of course, because Solomon was loaded his whole life, but he's right nonetheless. And so he says in Proverbs 23, verse 4, "Don't wear yourself out to get rich, because you know better. Stop." I love that. Again, he's just like talking right to you. And then he goes on to say, "As soon as your eyes fly to it, it disappears, for it makes wings for itself and flies like an eagle to the sky." What a great principle to be reminded of, that as soon as you try to set your eyes on wealth, it's gone. As soon as you think that you have it within reach, you find a way to lose it. It's here today, gone tomorrow. That's actually something that Ecclesiastes picks up on in a few places. But I think, what if we took that to heart? How much energy do we give towards envying and desiring and wanting to accumulate riches, when the Bible tells us explicitly, don't wear yourself out for it? So I think that was an interesting principle about money. A lot in there. And Ryan, I'm interested to hear your thoughts. What would be different if in an area of life like giving or finances, if we just actually, without questioning God, if we just took it at face value and listened to what these principles command?
I think Solomon gets to that, actually, even in what I had 22:9. "A generous person will be blessed, for he shares his food with the poor."
Yeah.
I think there's some where, again, it's not about, and I think Ecclesiastes actually gets to this as well, because it's not bad to be rich. In fact, 19:7 says, "All brothers of a poor person will hate him. How much more do his friends keep their distance from him?" Yeah. And so there's this in-between spot where it's, okay, don't kill yourself to get riches. But obviously we know from Proverbs, don't be a sluggard and be poor and have nothing. And so there's an in-between ground where you have to do the work in which God has called you to get what he is giving you, and then use it wisely, which is one thing, we know from Kings and Chronicles that Israel was as rich as they were going to be in Solomon's time. Everybody had bread. Everybody had some kind of financial means. No Israelite was destitute or poor. Mm-hmm. And I do think that's something, when he talks about, hey, how do you go about thinking about wealth? He must have cultivated that well amongst the Israelites, who did support and encourage one another. They kept the feasts and the festivals. They kept the year of Jubilee. If I bought your field, I still had to give it back to you, and I didn't lend with interest, which is why later, when we get to Nehemiah and some of the historical books, where it's like the leaders are outright, how could you sell your brothers out? Nothing like this has ever happened. Mm-hmm. And I think those are principles. If we take them to heart through Solomon's wisdom, we can value money and possessions the right way. They won't master us, but they will be useful to us. I have a question mark in my Bible around 17, 8. A bribe seems like a magic stone to its owner. Wherever he turns, he succeeds. I'm not saying it's advocating for bribery. I have a question. I'm like, well, is he? But there's certainly something that's if you can leverage your possessions and your finances wisely, you will find more success than being the poor brother whose people keep their distance.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Great point. A lot in how we leverage it. And that seems a little, from him, it seems a little tongue-in-cheek about bribes. It's probably not a wholesale endorsement.
No.
Probably ironic that to the person who accepts bribes, it just seems everywhere I look, people want to give me money. That's great. Well, we know why. But I think a great way that sums this up, this is actually a really powerful prayer that you can find in Proverbs 30 that I think sums up a biblical approach to finances. Kind of a dangerous prayer to pray, and I don't know how quickly we should pray this without thinking about its implications. But Proverbs 30, Solomon, Agur is the one speaking at this point, who's one of the other contributors, one of the other wisdom thinkers that contributes to the book of Proverbs. And the prayer that he includes starting in verse 7, is 2 things I ask of you. Don't deny them to me before I die. Keep falsehood and deceitful words far from me. Give me neither poverty nor wealth. Feed me with the food I need, otherwise I might have too much and deny you, saying, who is the Lord? Or I might have nothing and steal, profaning the name of my God. And that probably looks different for every person, because where is the line between having too much and having not enough? But I think it's an appropriate prayer that God keep me right in the place where I'm not going to fall into the ditch on either side. Don't give me so much that I'm going to be tempted to depend on you less, because that's a dangerous spiritual place to be. And don't give me so little that I'm tempted to compromise or to steal or to curse you for the lack that I experience. I think if we could learn to pray that way, boy, that'd be a beautiful thing. It sounds a lot to me like things that we hear in other places of the Bible, like Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount, teaching us to seek first the kingdom, and all these things will be added to you, and not to worry about what we'll eat or what we'll wear. I think about Paul saying that godliness with contentment is great gain. So there you go. That's maybe a proverbial approach to finances. You mentioned a couple other areas that I think are interesting. One of them that comes up a lot, I think, is the importance of self-control. And I think this is a sneaky one in the Proverbs, because it's there and you see it all the time, but we might not notice it. But the Proverbs talk about wisdom and how that looks in our life by talking a lot about having self-control over our emotions and also over our words. And I think these two things kind of go together. There's a proverb that tells us not to give full vent to our spirit when we're angry. There's a lot of places where we're warned against the dangers of having a hot temper, like Proverbs 25:28, which says, a person who does not control his temper is like a city whose wall is broken down. Now, we don't have walled cities anymore, but in the ancient world, that's a really bad thing. It means you have no defenses and no protection. So being a person who's walking around without control over his temper, who just lets loose whenever there's the slightest provocation, is someone who's torn down their own defenses and are opening themselves up to attack, to criticism, to judgment.
Yeah.
That's a heavy thing. And I think this principle comes up again and again, that if we don't develop through our relationship with God and through discipline, if we don't develop the ability to keep our cool, to think before we speak, and to rule over our emotions, it's going to always lead to foolishness.
Yeah, well, and Proverbs really throughout, the whole idea is to gain wisdom, right? To gain wisdom is better than to gain wealth. And he talks about just the idea, just what you said, The one who has knowledge restrains his words and keeps a cool head and is a person of understanding. A fool does not delight in understanding, but only wants to show off his opinions.
Oh yeah, I had that one highlighted too.
And I think that kind of sums up the topic. But even in 18:12, before his downfall, a person's heart is proud, but humility comes before honor. And all of those sum up that topic. And I think what Proverbs gets at is Solomon and the other authors, Hezekiah's in here, and then again, chapter 30. It's good to gain wisdom. This is about learning and reading these and gaining understanding, not just like head knowledge that you can have it in there, but do you actually understand what the wisdom is behind the words, or can you just throw things out there? Because if your heart doesn't understand it and live it well,
yeah,
then you're not going to be able to do anything with it. I mean, it talks about there's the man's heart or knowledge is like a deep well, but you have to have the tool to his hand has to go down and be able to get it. You have to have a tool to get to draw that water out.
Yeah,
and so many people can be all about the knowledge and wanting to share it, but they don't really have the right tool at times to deliver it in real world application.
Yeah, that's exactly right. No, I love that. So we have to be willing to read. We have to be willing to read the Proverbs and the wisdom literature with a lot of self-examination.
And I think that's the hard part. We think we're already, I know these little sayings. They're cute. They're quaint.
Yeah. Would you have any advice for people who read the Proverbs and maybe there's a thought that, I wonder how I'm doing in this area? And how should we approach self-assessment? And are there wise steps that we can put in place? Like I'm thinking, if I'm reading this and I hear, boy, a wise person rules over his tongue. A foolish person lets loose and gives full vent to his spirit. I wonder which one of those camps I fall into. How do we develop that sort of self-awareness? What kind of options are available to us?
I do think the best, I guess you call it an experiment exercise I ever had from like a class was to, they gave us a questionnaire to give to family and friends, and then you gave it back. So you emailed it out to them with like very little, just, hey, I'm looking for feedback for this class I'm in. And it's that way you don't taint it in any way. And then you get it back. Now you can meet with a friend too. The exercise enabled to like, Jake, here's this questionnaire I got from a mentor or professor, and get it back was interesting because then they fill it out on their own. And it's a little, you don't have the time to get defensive because they're just filling it out. So that's a long way of saying, ask people and get insight.
Yeah. Isn't that called a 360 review, like a 360 degree review?
Yes. I did that I think last year with my ministry coach, but even I was at a church and we had to take a class. It's called character development. And as part of your character development, you had to send this form out to people and get it back.
Wow.
And then share it with the class of people.
Yeah, that's humbling. Man, if you have the humility to do that, what a fruitful endeavor that could be, to sit down with a trusted mentor or friend and say, hey, I'd like you to give me some feedback on me.
Yeah.
What do I not know about myself? What are the things I don't see?
Yes.
Yeah, wow. That'd be effective for personal growth. Yeah. I was thinking, though, because, something that hits me a lot, I know, is wisdom in what I say. I'm a talker. I tend to be an extrovert. And so oftentimes we'll get done with a Sunday morning and I'll go home and think, man, there's probably one or two things I said this morning in casual conversation that I wish I hadn't said. Like a couple weeks ago when there was a couple at church and I asked them when their wedding date was. Because I thought that they had gotten engaged. I thought I saw something on Facebook and they hadn't. And they looked at me very bewildered, and I realized that I had created an awkward moment. I do that all the time. So, I'm thinking as I read this, I know that there's areas in my life. I go back to thinking about the amount of words that come out of our mouth. I thought this was powerful. I'm skipping ahead to Ecclesiastes just because it echoes Proverbs here. Chapter 10, verses 12 through 14. The words from the mouth of a wise person are gracious, but the lips of a fool consume him. There is undoing. It goes on in verse 13. The beginning of the words from his mouth is folly, but the end of his speaking is evil madness. Yet the fool multiplies words.
Yes.
Man, that I think hits for me is the idea of not multiplying words. What are you going to say? That was a very pregnant pause, my friend.
Is
this going to turn into my 360-degree review?
No, there's just a story I thought about sharing from high school that I'm not going to share.
Okay, sounds good. Hey, look at you not multiplying words.
And that was exactly what that topic was about from that.
I think isn't there another proverb that says, it is wisdom to conceal a matter, but a fool advertises his stupidity or something like that?
And I'm not going to advertise my young, even more amateur stupidity.
That's growth, my friend. That's God's grace at work in your life. Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's something I've grown more passionate about as I've spent more time in ministry is you can have all of this quote unquote spiritual maturity in the world. You can do all the Bible studies. You can be in church for decades at a time. And if you don't develop a sense of emotional maturity, ability to rule over your feelings and allow the Holy Spirit to give you self-control, to learn to tame your tongue and deal with your emotional reactions to things, it's always going to be a hindrance in your progress. It's always going to serve as like a glass ceiling to your growth. Would you agree?
Yeah, I would echo that if you, I mean, we talk about it, right? You know, the idea of character and how you have to build your character before you build your leadership or your platform. And you see it when someone gets elevated beyond what their character is. And just what you said, that character begins to be the glass ceiling of whatever they're leading, because they won't be able to lead beyond that.
Yes, that's right. Your leadership will never exceed what your character can support.
Yeah.
And, you know, that's a lesson I had to learn the hard way, I think, in life. My path to ministry landed me in my first full-time ministry role at 22 years old, 21, I think 22, something around there. And I was not emotionally mature. I think that's fair to say. I mean, not a lot of us are at 22. My prefrontal cortex was still not fully developed because it doesn't happen until 25. But then after that, my level of responsibility in my life grew rapidly. It went marriage, it went full-time ministry, then parenting right away that same year, then church leadership, then leadership in the organization at my kids' school, right? And so my responsibility and leadership demands expanded rapidly. My emotional maturity did not keep up, which meant that what happened is it's like, did you ever do that activity in school where you build like the popsicle stick bridges? Okay, and you just add stuff to it till it breaks?
Yes.
Well, eventually it broke. And I ended up stressed out, ended up losing my mind a little bit, not completely, but having a breakdown. And I've shared that story on, you know, our other podcast, More Grace, More Glory, how that landed me in counseling and having to work through some really deep issues in my heart. And the lesson learned for me is if your responsibility exceeds the development of your character and your emotional maturity, it's going to lead to imbalance every single time. And that's destructive.
Yeah. And Proverbs really does, I think, I mean, that's Solomon in the very beginning. You know, write these things on your heart. Keep them as a medal around your neck to always remind you, right? I think sometimes we can get through with Proverbs and then close it and put it away and think, well, I read through it once, I understand it. And I think kind of to your point, there's like, but then first of all, God's word is living and active.
Yep.
And that's like a call to go back to it, because you're going to understand it in one moment and you're going to see yourself as one character in here.
Yep.
And as you read these chapter after chapter, you should see yourself develop and learning. And so you almost begin, okay, here's how I move from the sluggard to the wise or the rich person. And then you got to learn almost as the rich person, whether that's rich in knowledge or whatever. Now, how do I act downwards so that I don't fall into the fall down from grace and lose my position?
Yes.
And that's that maturity and growth. And I think part of that maturity and growth is willing to see yourself as a growing person and not
Yes.
stagnant in one role
That's right.
forever.
Exactly. That's so key, what you just said. Seeing yourself as a person that's in progress continually rather than seeing yourself as a finished product. Yeah. I think there's two things with that is not having the pride to think, well, I'm a finished product. But also there's another way of thinking that's self-defeating to think that I can't change. I'm stuck. Right? The Bible gives a very hopeful picture that, no, you can apply yourself to discipline and knowledge, and you can grow. I loved this. I think this kind of sums up, I think if there, I wrote in here theme/big picture next to Proverbs 24 verses 3 and 4, because I think it gives a metaphor that speaks to just what you were saying. It says, a house is built by wisdom, and it is established by understanding. By knowledge, the rooms are filled with every precious and beautiful treasure. The house that's being built is you. It's the life that God is constructing in you and for you. And it's by knowledge and by wisdom that the house is built, and that the rooms are filled with every precious and beautiful treasure. As you learn to read the Proverbs and put your life under the microscope and apply yourself at discipline and understanding, God fills the rooms of your life with treasure. I mean, that's a really beautiful picture, I think.
Yeah. No, and a great teacher expanded upon this and said, and if you build your house on this rock, a storm will come and the winds will rage and it will not fall.
Yeah.
But if you build it on sand, the winds will come and it will fall, and what a great fall it will be.
Absolutely. Such a great connection. And as we think in a Christ-centric way, even in the Proverbs, I think what you just said nails it. That the way that Proverbs connects to Jesus is Jesus was the embodiment of wisdom. And he taught in a way that was very similar in many ways to the way that Solomon taught in the Proverbs. He gave these same clear pictures of wisdom and foolishness. And what we see come into focus in the ministry of Jesus is Solomon describes wisdom generally. Jesus shows us what wisdom really is, which is to know him and to obey his teachings and his commandments.
Yes. And some of that picture, there's just an irony whenever I read this, is Solomon's life. Like you just said it. He speaks of it generally. And he probably generally kept these themes.
Yep.
But when you look at his life and how Israel was the downfall after him, and how the wives and all the things that went wrong.
Yep.
He didn't live it like Jesus actually lives out the wisdom.
And I think he knew it. I think he knew he didn't live it. And that's a great transition into the next book of the Bible, which is Ecclesiastes, because I read this today, and I thought it was pretty ironic in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, because Solomon wrote this as an aging king in his later years. And in Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verse 13, Solomon himself writes, "Better is a poor but wise youth than an old but foolish king who no longer pays attention to warnings."
Yeah.
Wow. I wrote, wow, that's self-aware in my Bible. And then ironic ? Because you're right. Solomon is that old foolish king who didn't live according to the very principles that he tried to pass along to his sons in the book of Proverbs.
Yeah. And obviously his sons ignored his warnings and did not write them or keep them on their heart or anywhere visible to see.
Yeah. And there's some lessons in there too, that they didn't follow Solomon's words. They followed his example.
Yes.
All right. And that brings us to, I feel like I say this all the time, but one of my favorite books of the Bible, the book of Ecclesiastes. Now, this was great because it was an excuse for me to break out. We wrote a study guide for Ecclesiastes way back in 2017 when we studied it as a church. And as we were getting back into this book this past week, I just found, I was reminded why I love this book so much, because it is so honest, like uncomfortably honest. And it reminded me of something I actually referenced in that study guide way back when, but there's an old Johnny Cash song. It's old now, called "Hurt." And he wrote it shortly before he died. Really powerful, kind of haunting song. And he's reflecting on his life and his poor choices. He's comes across as an older man full of questions and regrets. And the song asks at one point, "What have I become, my sweetest friend? Everyone I love goes away in the end, and you can have it all, my empire of dirt." And I was like, wow, that's Ecclesiastes, because that feels exactly like what Solomon is reflecting on at the end of his life, looking back at all the riches, all of the fame, all the splendor, all the nation building, and all the royal meetings with rulers from all over the world who came to party with Solomon because he was the wisest man in the world. And he's looking back at all of it and saying, it all is meaningless. It's an empire of dirt. So, Ryan, as we make our way into Ecclesiastes, give me your take on the book. Give me some ideas of what Ecclesiastes is and what we should be looking for.
Yeah, it's fun. You said that we can follow a line of black and white with Proverbs, and I think Ecclesiastes is like a sharper, like magnifying glass into the reality of that.
Yeah.
Of okay, not only like here's wisdom and here's foolishness, but let's take it like a molecule at a time.
Yeah.
And he talks, whether it's work or life or relationships and possessions, he is brutally honest. But it all comes back to the idea, at least from notes that I had to take in, that we should enjoy life to the fullest, knowing that God is in charge and will judge our actions. And in that, with all the paradoxes back and forth of what's good and what's bad, we just simply have to enjoy what God has given us.
Yeah, I like that. And he does, one thing that we say to pay attention to that's an important reading tool is paying attention to repetition.
Yeah.
And in Ecclesiastes, there are some interpretive keys to the book if you pay attention to what gets repeated. And you might notice a few things that you'll see. First is this really interesting phrase that he uses. It's actually what we use as the title for our study guide. He will describe something that happens in the world that sucks. Essentially, he'll say, basically, like in one point, he describes how there's times when righteous people get what wicked people deserve.
Yes.
And there's times when wicked people get what righteous people deserve. And he says, sometimes you look and you see oppression of the poor and perversion of justice, and don't be astonished at it, because this is just how the world works.
Yes.
And he says all of these things are like chasing the wind.
Yeah.
It is futility. It shows that the world we live in is futile. It doesn't matter, which is a brutal comment to consider. And I think it's actually an interesting word picture to think about. He compares all of these things that he's considering of, like, the fact that you work your whole life to accumulate wealth, and then at the end of your life, you can't keep it. You die naked, you bring nothing with you, and it all goes to somebody else. And he says, this is chasing the wind. And if you visualize it, imagine trying to go hunting to capture the wind and trying to hold it in your hands. It's impossible, right? And that's what he says these different experiences are like in our world. And the word he uses this is like futility.
Yeah. That's what I have it. I use orange in my Bible to like highlight the repeated words, and over again. This too is futile in a pursuit of the wind. I mean, he sums up so many sections in that, which is a good reminder. I mean, we should take note there, because here's the wisest man who ever lived. And like he says in the beginning of this, he went to go fill his heart with all the pleasures of things.
Yep.
He knows the highest of highs and experienced, I'm sure, the lowest of the lows in that pursuit. And if he's saying this too is futile, something to be said to take note of your own life. Are you pursuing what he was in the same way?
Yeah.
I think we can historically lose sight, like, oh, well, we're so much more advanced. And yet the same pursuits that he's going after are realistically the same idols.
Yes.
In our own hearts and lives.
The same categories.
Yeah. They just look They just look different.
Poverty, wealth, pleasure, knowledge, materialism, all of these things he examines one by one. And the way they think about it, I actually think, as I was reading today some more, I think Ecclesiastes is the most brilliant philosophical work ever written. Solomon is like a genius philosopher because he's conducting basically an experiment about the meaning of life.
Yes.
He's asking the greatest question that philosophers have wrestled with ever since humanity has recorded their thinking in writing, which is, where can meaning and purpose be found? And so if you visualize how the book works, he's like moving from stone to stone, overturning it to look and say, is meaning and fulfillment found here? Oh, is meaning found over here? Can I find it in pleasure? Nope, he says in chapter 2, I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. My wisdom also remained with me. All that my eyes desired, I didn't deny him. I mean,
isn't that crazy?
Wow.
Yeah.
He said, I did not refuse myself any pleasure, for I took pleasure in all my struggles. And this was my reward for all my struggles. When I considered all that I had accomplished and what I had labored to achieve, I found everything to be futile and a pursuit of the wind. Okay? So I guess pleasure isn't where meaning's going to be found. He observes, can meaning be found in work? Well, no, because your work doesn't last and you die and you become dust again. So that's also futile and chasing the wind. He says in chapter 4, I saw all labor and all skillful work is due to one person's jealousy of another. This too is futile and a pursuit of the wind. So the fool folds his arms and consumes his own flesh. Better one handful with rest than two handfuls with effort and a pursuit of the wind. So Proverbs talks about working hard and staying focused. And in Ecclesiastes, Solomon is just like, well, it doesn't matter. So you might as well just do half the job and rest. A little old and jaded. But at least he's honest, right?
Yeah. No, that's the important. He speaks honesty to it. And if there's somebody who think about all that he amassed and everything he did. And then he's realizing at the end, he's probably looking back at all the other kings before him. Well, there wasn't ancient wise, there wasn't a lot in Israel's history at that point.
Yeah.
But realizing at some point, somebody's going to come, they're going to do something new, and even the great good things you did never be remembered.
They'll never be remembered.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe you'll be remembered for a generation or two, and then your memory's gone.
I mean, talk about self-reflection.
No kidding.
Talk about a guy, because he did great. He built the aqueducts. He did all these great things to build the city up. And in the end, he knew one day this city will be dust. Nobody will care.
Uh-huh. Absolutely.
I shouldn't say the city be dust because he believed God would come back. But his name in terms of what he had accomplished. If that doesn't humble you and put you in a place of right thinking.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important if we're I think maybe a good question that people might be asking is, okay, well, Proverbs says all this stuff. And then I wrote down that one of the things we find in Ecclesiastes is almost like anti-Proverbs, where he'll say almost the opposite of what he said in Proverbs. And you're thinking, how do we make sense of that, where these things seem to contrast with each other? Or is Ecclesiastes showing us that none of that really mattered? Mm-hmm. Yeah. But really, I think what we should see in this is Proverbs is kind of how the world is supposed to work.
Yes.
It's in a perfect world. This is how things work. This is how God designed them. Mm-hmm. But the interpretive word that's really important in Ecclesiastes is the word futility, because that's something that comes back to Genesis, where in Genesis 3, when Adam and Eve sin, we read that creation was subjected to futility. And so what Solomon is feeling in Ecclesiastes is he's seeing the brokenness. He's seeing the cracks in our world. And so we see Proverbs as this ideal that this is how the world should work. And generally, it really is how it does. Generally, laziness is going to be a path to destruction. And so it's good to be diligent and work. But Solomon's then wrestling at the end of his life with it doesn't always work that way. And so this word futility is something that we need to explore because it's a condition of the fall. In fact, Paul says in Romans 8 that all creation has been subjected to futility and is groaning for redemption. And I think that's how we should read Ecclesiastes, as these are groans for redemption. Ecclesiastes is what happens to the human experience if there's no redemption. If you take redemption out of the picture, it is all dust. It's all meaningless. It's all futile. But the good news, and where this points us to Christ, is it's not futile, because redemption does exist. And the beauty of what Christ did is he entered into our futility. He entered into a world that was burdened by all of this meaninglessness because of death, essentially. I mean, what Solomon's wrestling with is death makes everything meaningless in the end, unless there's a way to break the power of death. Yep. And that's where Christ enters the picture. Yeah. And so it's important as we read Ecclesiastes not to read this as, oh, wow, yeah, I guess it doesn't matter what we do. No, this is a picture of, if you don't have a full picture of redemption, which Solomon didn't, he can see that God is the answer somehow. And he kind of arrives there at the end of the book that, hey, what can we do? Well, we know that what's good is to fear God, keep his commands, eat, drink, and enjoy the life that he's given us. Well, yeah, that's true, but now in light of Christ, we know the other side of the equation.
Boom. But that's right where he lands, and that's where he is, right? Because otherwise, the other option is just what he says. I've witnessed it. The good person and the wicked person all go back to dust. They all return right where they came from.
Yes. And it kind of points me back to another thing I was thinking of in the New Testament, where we're told that whatever we do, whether we eat or drink or whatever, that we're to do it all for the glory of God. And so it kind of, to me, forms a bridge with Ecclesiastes, that Solomon's like, yeah, I think that meaning can be found in just like being content with what you have and enjoying what God's given you and working while you're here. But the New Testament picture redeems all that, saying, yeah, the meaning of life is to serve God, but it's to do it in faith, to trust Christ, and to live for his glory in every area of life. And this is interesting to me. I think specifically this whole idea of Jesus entering into our futility is important. I just want to touch on this as we close. I saw a video this week where I heard an atheist apologist. Okay, so this is someone who debates Christians on the internet to try to get to try to score internet points. Okay, and of course this sort of rhetoric and what's the word that I'm thinking of? It's another word for argument, but I can't think of it right now. Polemics. These sort of polemics go on all the time online. And so there was an atheist apologist that was making a wild argument the other day that I read. And the video was posted by, I'm not sure if you've seen this account, Red Pen Logic. Have you seen this guy? Okay. So he's a Christian apologist that will show like a short TikTok video or something from an atheist or a skeptic, and he'll kind of dissect the arguments. And it was really interesting because the atheist argued that the sacrifice of Jesus, I've never heard this argument before. He was saying it really was not a big deal to God because he didn't lose anything. He said Jesus was God before and he was God after. So what's the big deal? He had one bad day. And I was like, okay, that's an interesting take.
Yeah.
But I think, and this is going somewhere, I promise, there's a few big problems with that way of thinking. First off, I think it's a misrepresentation to say that being crucified is a bad day. I think that's worse than just a bad day. I think he's kind of underselling the nature of crucifixion. And
not to forget that he was also flogged and whipped and
beaten within an inch of his life.
That would have killed you before you even had to carry the cross up the hill to be, anyway. So
publicly exposed to humiliation, stripped naked, in front of Jerusalem, the watching city.
People are, I just, when I think back to like the Passion, you think about how he was flogged, like that would expose organs in your body.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you're
horrible. So
saying it's a bad day.
Yeah, I think he's underselling it. Yeah, I don't want to have a bad day like that.
No.
Then I think the second part of that is it denies the spiritual realities of what Christ endured. What Christ endured on the cross was not merely physical. He swallowed the agony of humanity's sin, meaning he experienced the torment of demonic attack, of the weight spiritually of the entire world's sins. He experienced personally the wrath of God poured out on him specifically. And I think that that's important not to miss. But here's where this connects with Ecclesiastes. I think it really ignores the nature of the incarnation, which is that Christ, when he became a man, when the Word of God took on flesh, he didn't do that on a limited basis. That was not a temporary change. Yeah. Christ today is still alive in a human body. Mm-hmm. A glorified human body, yes, but all the fullness of God confined itself to a physical human body. Like before this, Jesus shared in the omnipresence of God.
Yep.
After this, he is not omnipresent in the same way. He is a physical being. Mm-hmm. And he entered into the full experience of human futility. And I think that's key to our understanding of the incarnation, that we need to understand just how far Christ descended and the extent to which he limited himself and took upon himself a curse that he didn't need to bear. And that's kind of where I think we find hope in Ecclesiastes, is Jesus is the Redeemer who comes to enter into our world, to subject himself to the curse, to the futility on our behalf. And that gives us reason to hope that we can have a life free from futility when we're reunited with him.
Amen.
All right. That was a roundabout way to get there.
That's all right.
Speaking of roundabout conversations, excited for next week. Next episode, we get to tackle Song of Songs.
The epic love letter in which young Jewish boys were not able to read until their bar mitzvah, I believe.
Yeah, I can see why. That should be age-limited material. Yep. So if you want to hear a couple guys sitting around talk about Hebrew love poetry, tune into next week's episode of the Bible Lab. Is that a good hook?
You won't be here.
I'm on vacation.
I'm just realizing, oh, wait. Joel and I okay. Oh, yeah.
Anyway, well,
come back next week.
We can laugh about it. It'll be fun. But what I am excited about is, our goal on this podcast is always to show how every part of the Bible speaks. And as we've been making our way through Song of Songs this week, I think there's some great lessons to dig into, some great angles to talk about. So anyway, well, thanks for joining us on the Bible Lab today as we continue to explore the wisdom literature. Join Ryan and Joel next week as they explore Song of Songs. Anyway, if you enjoyed this podcast, head on over to iTunes and Spotify and give us a review. Leave us a 5-star review. It helps other people to discover the great content that we share each week. And as always, if there are questions or clarifications or follow-ups, or you just want to say hello, you can drop an email to BibleLab@lifebridgegb.org. Thanks so much for tuning in this week, and we will catch you next time.
Sun,